Friendsify you want to watch super hit movie, Sound of Freedom in English. Then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, West Films Friends, in today's video. The movie we're going to talk about is called Sound of Freedom. I am also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by West Films. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I'm going to tell you apart from this. We will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, starcast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends. So let's start the video. Sound of Freedom is a Euro 23 American thriller film, directed and co-written by Alejandro Monteverde, and starring Jim Caviezel, Mira Sorvino, and Bill Camp. Caviezel plays Tim Ballard, a former U.S. government agent who embarks on a mission to rescue children from sex traffickers in Colombia. It is produced by Eduardo Verástegui, who also plays a role in the film. The plot centers around Ballard's Operation Underground Railroad, OUR, an anti-sex trafficking organization. The film was released on July 4, 2023 by Angel Studios and was a sleeper hit, grossing $251 million against a $14.5 million budget to become one of the most successful independent films in history. It received mixed reviews from critics, while audience reception was highly positive. The film attracted considerable attention for its connections to the QAnon conspiracy theory. Sound of Freedom plot. In 2013, Roberto Aguilar, a poor father of two from Tegucigalpa, Honduras, is approached by a former beauty queen, Giselle. She offers to sign his young children, Rocio and Miguel Aguilar, to child modeling contracts. He accepts and takes them to the photo shoot. When he returns to pick his children up, they are gone. It is revealed that the children have been abducted and sold to be used as sex slaves. In Calexico, California, Tim Ballard is a special agent for Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, where he arrests people who possess and distribute child pornography. The painful work takes a great toll on his personal life, and this is only worsened when another agent, Chris, points out that despite arresting and prosecuting numerous child predators, they are largely unable to prevent more children from being exploited. Ballard knows this is because most of them are outside the U.S., but Chris's words stick with him. He speaks to a suspect he arrested, Ernst Oshinsky, deceiving the man into believing he is a secret pedophile himself and using quotes from Oshinsky's novel. Once he gains Oshinsky's trust, he sets up a meeting with a trafficked child, prompting Ballard to arrest Oshinsky on child trafficking, and is able to arrest Earl Buchanan, the man who purchased Miguel. Ballard rescues Miguel and asks him for information that would help him find other missing children. Ballard learns that Miguel's sister Rocio is still missing, and the boy asks him to save her. Ballard arranges for Miguel to return home to Roberto, but not before Miguel gives Ballard his sister's St. Timothy necklace. Ballard starts looking for Rocio, and his search leads him to Cartagena, Colombia. He meets with Vampire, a former Cali cartel accountant who now works to save children from sex trafficking, and gains information on Giselle. After reading about a child sex club in Thailand which was shut down, Ballard decides that this is the perfect cover story to acquire a large number of Giselle's children in a sting operation. Vampiro gets a Colombian police officer, Jorge, and a wealthy citizen named Paulo Delgado to help with Ballard's mission. Ballard's supervisor, Frost, orders Ballard to return to the U.S. as he does not have the authority to conduct such an operation on foreign soil. Ballard resigns his position rather than abandon the search for Rocio. Sympathizing with Ballard's decision, Frost secretly persuades the staff of the U.S. Embassy in Colombia to assist him however they can. With Jorge acting as a middleman, Ballard and Vampiro pose as sex traffickers and convince Giselle to sell them 54 children, enabling the police to identify and arrest her while dismantling her operation. Rocio is not among the freed youths. Beforehand, Ballard set up the trafficker's lawyer, Carne, to look like a snitch, while everyone else was detained. After interrogating one of Giselle's associates, Fuego, and revealing a photo of a dead Carne, unaware of the circumstances of Carne's death, Fuego breaks and tells Jorge that Rocio was sold to FARC, entrenched deep in the Amazon natural region. Jorge informs Ballard that there is no way to retrieve the girl because the region is a largely unmapped jungle wilderness, and any rebel territory is a no-fly zone for the Colombian government. Vampiro notes that medical personnel are allowed to enter on humanitarian grounds, and Jorge reluctantly agrees to help them obtain documentation to pose as doctors. The rebels refuse to let Vampiro enter, and Ballard is forced to continue by himself. Tim gains access to the FARC camp where Rocio is being held and learns that she is the personal sex slave for a FARC leader, El Alacran, the Scorpion, and along with others is required to mash coca leaves to produce cocaine. At night, Ballard is forced to kill El Alacran while freeing Rocio, and despite the rebels pursuing and firing on them, gets her to safety. Before they part, he gives her back the necklace Miguel gave him earlier. Rocio is finally returned to her father and brother, and the family goes home to Honduras. An epilogue says that Tim Ballard testified before the United States Congress and states that his testimony resulted in laws being passed that require the government to cooperate with foreign countries on sex trafficking investigations. The epilogue also claims that there are more people enslaved today than at any other time in history, including when slavery was legal. Cast: Jim Caviezel as Tim Ballard, a DHS agent who has changed his primary focus to rescuing children from their abductors. Mira Sorvino as Catherine Ballard, Tim's wife. Bill Camp as Vampire, a former cartel accountant, now a businessman secretly operating on saving abducted children. Eduardo Verástegui as Paulo Delgado, a wealthy man who helped and funded Ballard's opera. Javier Godino as Jorge, a police officer in Cartagena aiding Ballard in his op. Jose Zúñiga as Roberto Aguilar, a Honduran man whose kids, Rocio and Miguel, were kidnapped under a false pretense. Kurt Fuller as Frost, Ballard's DHS supervisor. Gary Basaraba as Earl Buchanan, an American child trafficker who bought Miguel. Gerardo Taracena as El Alacran, the Scorpion, a FARC rebel leader and drug lord who bought Rocio. Scott Hayes as Chris, a fellow DHS agent. Gustavo Sanchez Parras el Calacas. Jessica Baroto as Giselle, a former beauty queen running a child trafficking operation. Chris Avedizian as Ernst Oshinsky, a registered sex offender and book author with connections to child traffickers. Cristal Aparicio as Rocio Aguilar, Roberto's daughter and oldest child who was abducted. Lucas Avila as Miguel Aguilar, Roberto's son and youngest child who was abducted. Manny Perez as Fuego, a ruthless trafficker working for Giselle. Mauricio Cujar as Carn, a sadistic lawyer for the sex traffickers and child predator. Production: Development Sound of Freedom was inspired by the work of Tim Ballard, the founder of Operation Underground Railroad, OUR, a non-profit started to stop trafficking. Work on the script began in 2015. He personally requested that Jim Caviezel portray him because he had been impressed with Caviezel's performance as Edmond Dantes in The Count of Monte Cristo, 2002. Caviezel said that he considers Sound of Freedom the second most important film he has ever appeared in, ranking it behind his starring role as Jesus Christ in The Passion of the Christ, 2004. The film was executive produced by Mel Gibson, Tony Robbins, who also partly financed the film's distribution, John Couch, John Paul DeJoria, Paul Hutchinson, Patrick Slim, and Andrew McCubbins, who was convicted in 2020 of running an $89 million Medicare fraud scheme. The film's score is composed by Javier Navarrete. The film features the song La Masa, composed by Cuban musician Silvio Rodriguez and performed by Argentine singer Mercedes Sosa. Filming. Principal photography began in the summer of 2018. The majority of the film was shot in Cartagena, Colombia. Additional scenes were shot in Calexico, California. Distribution. The film was completed in 2018, and a distribution deal was made with the Latin American subsidiary of 20th Century Fox. When the studio was purchased by the Walt Disney Company, it shelved the film. Subsequently, the filmmakers bought the distribution rights back from the studio. Verástegui approached Angel Studios with the release rights. Angel presented the film to an online group of 100,000 investors in its past projects called the Angel Guild, which gave it a yes vote within days. In 2023, Angel Studios had acquired the worldwide distribution rights with a planned release during the second half of 2023. In May of the same year, it received a release date of July 4, 2023. Angel used equity crowdfunding to raise the funds needed to distribute and market the film. 7,000 people invested, allowing Angel to meet its $5 million goal in 2 weeks. They also encouraged patrons to pay it forward to allow people who might not otherwise see the film to watch it in theaters forerunner. On July 26th, Angel Studios confirmed that Sound of Freedom would be released in 23 international markets throughout 2023. The film was released in UAE on August 17th, in South Africa, Iceland and Lithuania on August 18th, and Australia and New Zealand on August 24th. Other countries where the film was shown include Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Belize, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Serbia on August 31st. In addition, the film was released in the Philippines on September 20th, as well as in the United Kingdom and Ireland on September 1st, and in Spain on October 11. Pay it forward scheme. During the film's theatrical run, multiple outlets and moviegoers reported theaters claiming to be sold out, though seats in the auditoriums were empty. Some attribute this to pay it forward sales by Angel Studios. A message at the end of the film urges viewers to buy an extra ticket for someone who would not otherwise be able to see the film, suggesting many of the extra tickets were left unused, resulting in almost empty sold-out shows and unoccupied seats. Supporters paid for $26.1 million in tickets, roughly 1.8 million seats, for people to see the film for free. Angel Studios said that $21.8 million, or about 84% of those ticket purchases, were redeemed by moviegoers. Accuracy. The film was inspired by the life of Tim Ballard, who left the Department of Homeland Security around 2013 and founded Operation Underground Railroad, OUR, to work with local police in other countries to catch child sex traffickers. The film's central plot point, that of a brother and sister lured to a photo shoot in Honduras, is not an event that Ballard has claimed actually happened. According to American Crime Journal reporters, Ballard embellished details about the story told in the film. Ballard stated that some things are definitely overreported. He did not go into the jungle by himself to rescue a little girl, nor did he kill a man to rescue a child. According to Ballard, the island rescue operation Triple Take involved both minors and adults, while the film portrays all victims as children. Ballard claimed that his team not only rescued 54 minors, but 123 individuals at 2 additional locations. The real-life OUR has been criticized for its conduct during sting operations and has been accused of exaggerating claims regarding its work. The actual organization's practices have come under scrutiny, including using inexperienced donors and celebrities as part of its jump team, a lack of meaningful surveillance or identification of targets, failing to validate whether the people they intended to rescue were in fact actual trafficking victims, and conflating consensual sex work with sex trafficking. Ballard himself was removed as the head of OUR, following an internal investigation in 2023. In a December 2023 statement posted on its website, the organization said an independent law firm reached the conclusion that Ballard had engaged in unprofessional behavior that violated OUR's policies and values. Many experts in the anti-trafficking movement voiced concern about the movie's portrayal of human trafficking. Anti-trafficking experts noted that the movie's focus on human trafficking constitutes a very small segment of the overall problem, that trafficking is often perpetrated by people known to the victim rather than kidnapping by strangers, that anti-trafficking interventions have changed significantly since the 10-year-old story depicted in this movie, and that self-liberation rather than heroic rescues is the predominant way through which individuals escape trafficking situations. Connections to QAnon conspiracy theories. While the film does not mention any QAnon conspiracy theories, critics and anti-trafficking experts have pointed out that the film embellishes the reality of child exploitation and stokes QAnon conspiracy theories, referring to a belief that a core group of devil-worshipping elite run the world. Both Ballard and star Caviezel have been public about their belief in conspiracy theories of the QAnon movement. On NPR's All Things Considered, Mike Rothschild, author of The Storm is Upon Us, How QAnon Became a Movement, Cult, and Conspiracy Theory of Everything, argued that the film is being marketed to QAnon believers, it's being embraced by this community, and its leading actor is a huge part of the QAnon community. While promoting the film in an interview with Jordan Peterson in July 2023, Ballard claimed to have recently raided a West African baby factory where children are sold for organ harvesting and satanic ritual abuse, echoing another QAnon myth. In July 2020, in a video post, he lent credence to a QAnon conspiracy theory that falsely accused furniture company Wayfair of laundering money gained from child sex trafficking. Ballard has criticized those drawing a connection between the film and QAnon, saying they make zero connection to the actual story. It's very difficult to make that connection when it's actually based on a true story. He told the New York Times, "Some of these theories have allowed people to open their eyes, so now it's our job to flood the space with real information so the facts can be shared." In an interview with Variety, the film's director Alejandro Monteverde responded to the QAnon allegations, characterizing them as misconceptions, and saying that the movie's origins came from a network TV news segment on child sex trafficking, which he saw 2 years before the QAnon movement emerged. Work on the script began in 2015. He also said that he has to keep his distance from people that are too close to the film that are in politics. Reception. Critical response. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 57% of 83 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 5.9/10. The website's consensus reads, "Sound of Freedom is an effective and suspenseful call to action against human trafficking, yet not free of issues in its depiction of the sensitive subject matter." Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 36 out of 100 based on 11 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Variety's Owen Gleiberman gave the film a positive review, writing, "Let's assume that, like me, you're not a right-wing fundamentalist conspiracy theorist looking for a dark, faith-based suspense film to see over the holiday weekend. Even then, you needn't hold extreme beliefs to experience Sound of Freedom as a compelling movie that shines an authentic light on one of the crucial criminal horrors of our time, one that Hollywood has mostly shied away from." The Detroit News' Adam Graham gave the film a C+ grade, writing, "Even as the film's pacing starts to thud, its work has been done, competently if not altogether artfully. Sometimes obvious works just fine." Film Threat's Alan Eng recommended the film, writing, "Sound of Freedom is almost as if you're listening to Tim Ballard tell his incredible story of rescuing children and having it dramatized on screen. It's heartfelt, informative, and inspiring." National Review's Madeline Kearns called the film provocative and gripping, adding that it reminds us that as long as children are being abused, no matter where they are or how many there are, the rest of us ought to care. Faith-based reviews were largely positive. Glenn Kenny, writing for the New York Times, gave a critical review. "The queasiness derives from the contemporary thriller vibes of the police procedural material. Then there are the scenes in which actual child actors perform being prepped for provocative pictures by adult groomers. What are the ethics of depiction here? The makers of this film initially seem to be grappling with how to properly tell this story." He went on to say, "The director Alejandro Monteverde does have some sense of flourish, what with several single-point perspective shots and considered dissolves, but concluded, oddly, the picture's muted tone ultimately undercuts its solemn sense of mission." RogerEbert.com's Nick Allen was also negative, writing, "Sound of Freedom is a solemn, drawn-out bore with a not particularly bold narrative stance. Caring about the safety of children is roughly the easiest cause for any remotely decent human being." But while being so committed to such solemnity and suffering, the truncated storytelling by co-writers Monteverde and Barr neglects to flesh out its ideas or characters, or add any more intensity to Ballard's slow burn. Search for two kids in particular, Lucas Avila's Miguel and Cristal Aparicio's Rocio, whose faces haunt him. Slate's Sam Adams said in his review that the film appears to be a straightforward search and rescue thriller, in which Ballard, a special agent at the Department of Homeland Security, goes rogue to free a young girl from the clutches of a Colombian sex trafficking ring. But it arrived in theaters surrounded by a cloud of innuendo, put forth by its star and its noisiest right-wing supporters, conspiratorial insinuations about who doesn't want this story to be told and what real-world traffickers are really up to. The Times of Israel's Shira Lee Bartov wrote that the film draws upon multiple conspiracy theories that include anti-Jewish canards, including the blood libel, while its star, actor Jim Caviezel, has floated anti-Semitic theories in interviews promoting the film. The Telegraph's Ed Power gave the bizarrely dull film 1 star out of 5, calling it a creepy and breathtakingly dreary child trafficking thriller, whose success in American theaters proves America is not only a different country, it's a different planet. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian also panned it as an odd, uncertainly acted, opaquely intended movie, while Wendy ID gave it 2 stars out of 5 in a review for its sister paper The Observer, calling it both an earnest and well-intentioned attempt to engage with a very real and harrowing issue, and a thunderously crass and manipulative movie that is hampered by erratic pacing, pantomime bad guys, and an over-fondness for shots of Caviezel weeping, God-fearing manly tears. Box office. Sound of Freedom grossed $184.2 million in the United States and Canada and $66.4 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $251 million. It is the 10th highest-grossing film of 2023 in the U.S. and Canada. By late August 2023, it was considered one of history's most successful independent films. In March 2024, Deadline Hollywood reported that of the film's box office gross at that point, $249.5 million, 52%, $129.6 million went to theater access costs, while 8%, $18.96 million was withheld by taxes. 19%, $47.6 million accounted for print and advertising costs, 14%, $47.6 million served as payment to the filmmakers, and the remaining 7%, $17.8 million returned to Angel Studios. The film was released in the United States on July 4, 2023. Prior to its release, the film sold $10 million in ticket pre-sales at 2,626 theaters. According to Slash Film, the film received little coverage in the mainstream media leading up to its release. Originally, Sound of Freedom was projected to gross $11-15 million over its first week of release, with some estimates reaching $20 million. He Film grossed $14.2 million on its first day of release, $3.6 million on its second, and $3.5 million on its third, for a Tuesday-Thursday total of $21.3 million, raising 6-day estimates to $36 million. It went on to make $18.2 million in its opening weekend, with a 6-day total of $40.2 million, finishing third at the box office. Its success surprised many industry experts, especially considering it was only released in 2,850 theaters, considerably fewer than Insidious: The Red Door, 3,188 theaters, and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, 4,600 theaters. Playing in 3,265 theaters in its second weekend, the film made $24.7 million, an increase of 26%, finishing second behind newcomer Mission: Impossible – Dead Reckoning Part 1. Sound of Freedom crossed the $100 million mark at the box office on 16th day of release. In its third weekend, the film made $20 million, finishing third behind newcomers Barbie and Oppenheimer. Playing in 3,411 theaters, the film continued to hold well in its fourth weekend of release, grossing $12.8 million and finishing in fourth. After its opening week, rumors and videos on social media claimed that AMC Theaters was canceling screenings and disrupting viewing by inventing technical difficulties and disabling air conditioning. Angel Studios' head of theatrical distribution, Brandon Purdy, said, "These rumors are not accurate," and stated that due to the positive reception and consumer demand, AMC had added 450 additional theaters on July 14. Audience reception and faith-based appeal. The film, which various contemporary sources describe as a Christian thriller, received highly positive reviews from viewers. At one point, it earned an audience score of 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Some movie industry analysts attributed the film's success in part to its appeal to an overlooked segment of the film audience. This is yet another example of a faith-based distributor breaking the rules and coming out a winner. ComScore senior analyst Paul Dergrabedian said, "It also shows that a grassroots marketing strategy and tapping into the power of the faith-based audience has proven to be a very effective method to generate profits." Christian website Movie Guide attributed the film's unexpected success to its wide demographic appeal and strong moral values. Variety wrote that ticket buyers have been predominantly female, while more than 50% of cinemagoers were over the age of 45. 1/3 of the audience has been Hispanic. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an A+, a standard grade for faith-based titles. The Los Angeles Times noted that the film had become a part of the culture war, stating that supporting the film has become a cause du jour for the MAGA crowd. The National Post argued that the film was an example of an independent studio beating Hollywood at its own game. Endorsements and special screening. Mel Gibson, Dana White, Elon Musk, Ben Shapiro, Jewel, Manny Pacquiao, Tim Tebow, and the Family Research Council endorsed the film. Donald Trump hosted a special screening at Trump National Golf Club Bedminster on the night of July 19, 2023. Accolades. For his performance in the film, Javier Godino won Best Actor in an International Production at the 32nd Actors and Actresses Union Awards. This peculiar film features a notably wooden lead performance from Jim Caviezel, best known for playing Jesus in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. It has become a U.S. box office sensation and an explosive campaign document, a phenomenon similar in its way to the once hugely popular viral video Kony 2012, which demanded the fugitive Ugandan cult leader Joseph Kony be arrested. Sound of Freedom is about child sex trafficking based on the reminiscences of anti-trafficking activist and campaigner Tim Ballard, and stars Caviezel as Ballard, who quits his job at a toothless U.S. government agency to rescue a young girl from a Colombian sex trafficking cartel. All decent people share a fundamental horror and outrage at child sexual abuse, but not everyone will share Caviezel's QAnon-type belief that child sex trafficking is run by elites who want to harvest the hormone adrenochrome from children, as Caviezel himself said at a recent conference. It should be noted that the film itself prudently does not feature any explicit conspiracy theories, but there are some startling moments. Caviezel's hero Ballard arrests a loathsome pedophile, the most influential pedophile in the film, a Mad Magazine figure of sweaty perviness who has published a pro-pedophile book called Apollodorus under the pseudonym Genghis Amore. His real name is Oshinsky. And what sort of a surname is that, you may ask? The most dramatic part of the film comes some way into the closing credits when Caviezel addresses the audience directly in a special video. He hints that this long-delayed film faced every roadblock you can imagine, but doesn't go into details. He says that the real heroes of the film are the little girl and her brother, and that these kids can be more powerful than the cartel kingpins, presidents, congressmen, or even tech billionaires. Caviezel's video seems to be campaigning for something. But what exactly? We all agree that child sexual abuse is disgusting, and that the intergovernmental cooperation that Ballard is demanding is a good idea. But this film seems to want something else. There is no reason why a movie about exploitation shouldn't be powerful. I myself like the recent thriller Sicario 2: Soldado, which was condemned in some liberal quarters as a Trumpian fantasy. But this is an odd, uncertainly acted, opaquely intended movie. Sound of Freedom, the movie of the moment, has a message first and a story second. Its message is to get us to care more about the horrors of child sex trafficking. It does that by showing queasy sequences of kids in danger, being carted around by slimy adults, and making us remember everyone's faces. Then it gives us a weary hero, Tim Ballard, an American man whose superpower is that he cares. This father and husband cares so much that he leaves his job at Homeland Security 10 months before earning a pension. Instead of only catching pedophiles, as he has done nearly 300 times before, he goes to Colombia and undercover to help rescue children. This man is played by a gentle and gravely serious Jim Caviezel, who shoulders this message's suffering just like when he played Jesus Christ in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. The story is true, but it barely comes to life with such a telling. Which is a shame, not just because it's uncomfortable to be numbed by these themes, but also because director Alejandro Monteverde well clears the low bar for filmmaking one expects from movies that are message first, and often come with similar faith-driven backers. Take away the noise surrounding it, and Sound of Freedom has distinct cinematic ambitions. A non-graphic horror film with what could be called an art house sensibility for muted rage and precise, striking shadows derived from an already bleak world. If Sound of Freedom were less concerned with being something important, it could be more than a mood. It could be a movie. All on its own, Sound of Freedom is a solemn, drawn-out bore with a not particularly bold narrative stance. Caring about the safety of children is roughly the easiest cause for any remotely decent human being. Previous films like Gone Baby Gone and Taken have also banked on that tension, showing how easy it is to be invested in a story when children are stolen and put into uncertain danger. But while being so committed to such solemnity and suffering, the truncated storytelling by co-writers Monteverde and Barr neglects to flesh out its ideas or characters or add any more intensity to Ballard's slow burn search for two kids in particular, Lucas Avila's Miguel and Cristal Aparicio's Rocio, whose faces haunt him. The true story framing only gives it so much edge before that, too, is dulled. This world is so fraught with worry about the children that it seems to avoid creating tension elsewhere, and so it places Ballard in dull scenes opposite gullible, one-dimensional creeps. His undercover missions, which sometimes have him speaking like the pedophiles he is pursuing, are more about the audience's discomfort than his danger. There are hardly any mind games to be played. Just the settings of sting operations made from a broad idea of how this would happen in real life. It's one anticlimactic moment after another, and while it's intriguing how Monteverde leans away from violence or machismo, it puts little else in its place. For anyone gearing up to see Sound of Freedom because the poster has Caviezel holding a gun and a glare, this isn't that kind of movie. Handsomely stark scenes are often reduced to 3 or 4 lines of dialogue, including the eureka moment of how Ballard gets involved in the process. A work buddy asks him how many children he's saved, so Ballard changes his line of work. Mira Sorvino, as Ballard's wife Catherine, plays a character who is credited at the end as inspiring his whole journey. But we only hear from her a couple of cliché sentences at a time. We at least get to hear more from Bill Camp, playing a confidant for Ballard. Camp has a gutting monologue about being at the heart of darkness of child sexual abuse. He's also there to say the movie's title and sets up Ballard to say its catchphrase, which you can now buy as a bumper sticker: "God's children are not for sale." With his blonde hair cutting through the movie's gray and black palette, Caviezel is a crucial anchor for this hollow character study to be taken as seriously as possible. It's an intriguing, restrained performance, but loses its appeal parallel to how the movie doesn't develop Ballard beyond being a symbol. A casual YouTube search on the real Ballard shows that he's a far more outspoken, hyper type than we see here. It suggests a different tone for such a character-focused story, and one wonders why the makers were weary of it. Sound of Freedom takes place in, and posits to be, a tough conversation piece about the world of child sex trafficking, but it's hardly any more informational than a horror movie about bogeymen. A few factoids about the pervasiveness of modern slavery are shared in text at the end, And there's a note about how Ballard's dedication helped pass legislation that made international cooperation on such stings more possible. But these notes are overshadowed by Sound of Freedom, yet again being misguided and making the cause about itself. As the end credits play, Jim Caviezel reappears to say how the makers of Sound of Freedom believe this movie could be the Uncle Tom's Cabin for 21st century slavery. He says that the children shown in the movie are the real heroes, but spends most of the time trying to empower you, the people, to spread the word, scan the QR code, and buy more tickets so other people can see this movie and put an end to this horror. But there's little transparency here about how seeing Monteverde's film can help stop child sex trafficking, as this movie suggests. The suspiciousness of Sound of Freedom is queasy itself. Film review. Sometimes we live an experience that requires the cells in our body to shift. This shift positions us in a way that we will never be the person we were prior to the initial experience. This happened to me on July 4th, 2023 in South Austin during and after watching the premiering film Sound of Freedom. The film left an indelible impression on me. This powerful movie tackles the harrowing issue of child sex trafficking with an apologetic degree of honesty, compassion, and a resolute determination to shed light on a dark corner of our world. It is an important film that not only captivates, but also raises awareness about an urgent and often overlooked problem. Sound of Freedom succeeds in capturing the attention of its audience from the very beginning, thanks to its gripping storytelling and expert direction. The screenplay, based on true events, flawlessly weaves together elements of drama, action, and suspense, keeping viewers engrossed and invested throughout. The film does not shy away from the uncomfortable truths of child sex trafficking, but manages to handle the subject matter with sensitivity and respect. The production value of Sound of Freedom is exceptional. The cinematography captures the rawness and intensity of the story, while the soundtrack adds depth to the journey. This allows the viewer to feel transported to the moments that altered the history of so many heroic acts and insurmountable conquering of odds. The attention to detail in depicting the different locations and cultures adds authenticity to the film, creating a truly immersive experience. The standout performances in this film deserve accolades. Jim Caviezel, Passion of the Christ, delivers a remarkable portrayal of Tim Ballard, the real-life hero who dedicated his life to rescuing children from the clutches of traffickers. His unwavering commitment to the role shines through, and he embodies the tireless determination and emotional depth of a man fighting against insurmountable odds. The supporting cast, including Mira Sorvino, Bill Camp, and Eduardo Verástegui, deliver equally strong performances, adding layers of authenticity and nuanced depth to the unfolding story. What sets Sound of Freedom apart is its ability to balance the heart-wrenching reality of child sex trafficking with moments of hope, strength, and resilience. The film not only exposes the brutal reality of this global issue, but also sheds light on the tireless efforts of organizations and individuals fighting to keep children safe. The film reminds us that even in the face of entrenched darkness, there is always room for compassion and bravery, and the power to change the preconceived outcome. Ultimately, the story is more than a movie. It is a call to action. It compels us to examine our roles in combating child sex trafficking and inspires us to become part of the solution. This film raises awareness about an issue that commands our attention, and it does so with grace and integrity. I highly recommend Sound of Freedom to anyone seeking a thought-provoking, sometimes uncomfortably honest, and inspiring cinematic experience. It is a nuanced testament to the power of storytelling and a stark reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. By watching this film, we can join the chorus of voices working to eradicate child sex trafficking and pave the way for a safer and brighter future for our children. The extent of chatter around the Colombian child sex trafficking thriller Sound of Freedom, a cause célèbre of QAnon conspiracy junkies, a U.S. box office smash dogged by rumors of number fiddling, a platform for star Jim Caviezel's messianic tendencies, makes it hard to get a clear-eyed look at the film itself. Plus, there's the fact that negative reviews have acted as a lightning rod for reactionary bile on the internet. But here goes. The Picture, by Mexican director Alejandro Monteverde, is an earnest and well-intentioned attempt to engage with a very real and harrowing issue. It's also a thunderously crass and manipulative movie that is hampered by erratic pacing, pantomime bad guys, and an overfondness for shots of Caviezel weeping, God-fearing, manly tea. Sound of Freedom is being sold as a conservative thriller. It's based on the true story of Tim Ballard, the former Department of Homeland Security special agent who has devoted himself to fighting child sex trafficking and who took his crusade private when he founded Operation Underground Railroad with backing from Glenn Beck. The movie stars Jim Caviezel, who in the 19 years since he played the title role of Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, has been a go-to actor for the kind of faith-based projects the vast majority of Hollywood stars steer clear of. Wearing a trimmed dark beard and coppery blonde hair, Caviezel plays Ballard as a beatific G.I. Joe meets George C. Scott in Hardcore meets an avenging Jesus. The movie has a Christian undercurrent that occasionally becomes an overcurrent, as when Ballard explains why he's fixated on the crime of trafficking. Because God's children are not for sale. Sound of Freedom has been heavily marketed on right-wing media, like Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, and one of the grand subtexts of all of this, in taking on the issue of the horrific criminals who kidnap and traffic children, the film could be seen as adjacent to the alt-right paranoia that was originally stoked by 4chan and QAnon, the wingnut conspiracy theory about a Washington, D.C. pizza parlor being a front for a pedophile ring, extending into the larger conspiracy theory that says that the whole culture of liberalism is a racket to protect and cover up a cabal of pedophiles. All of that, let's be clear, is insane nonsense. Yet let's assume that, like me, you're not a right-wing fundamentalist conspiracy theorist looking for a dark, faith-based suspense film to see over the holiday weekend. The movie opens July 4th. Even then, you needn't hold extreme beliefs to experience Sound of Freedom as a compelling movie that shines an authentic light on one of the crucial criminal horrors of our time, one that Hollywood has mostly shied away from. The film was completed in 2018 and then shelved by Disney after it acquired 20th Century Fox, the film's original studio. It was finally bought back and is now being distributed independently. How many movies and TV shows have we all seen about drug trafficking? Too many. Child sex trafficking, by contrast, isn't a subject that lends itself to entertainment. But as Sound of Freedom informs us, it's the fastest-growing international criminal network the world has ever seen. A closing title states, accurately, that there are more people enslaved now by sex trafficking than there were when slavery was legal. And the nightmare lived by captured children is unspeakable, unimaginable, and all too real. Let's be clear, this matters more than the cocaine or opioids industry. One of the purposes of a movie like Sound of Freedom is to sound the alarm in the way that a dramatic feature film can do and that journalism often can't. It takes us into the forbidden zone. It taps our primal emotion of empathetic terror. Yet Sound of Freedom isn't a work of art like Lucas Moodyson's Lilia Forever, 2002, the one great movie that's been made about sex trafficking. No one saw it, but it's extraordinary. This is a genre thriller. That said, it's an urgent and honest one, and Caviezel gives his most committed performance since The Passion of the Christ. He's seasoned now, with the smoldering aura of a more sensitive Clint Eastwood. He knows how to underplay the rage and despair, and how to make the drama of going undercover into something life-size. In a sequence that's suck-in-your-breath devastating, Roberto Jose Zuniga, a single father in Honduras, agrees to let his 11-year-old daughter, Rocio Cristal Aparicio, and her 7-year-old little brother try out for a music competition show that's being overseen by Katie Giselle, Jessica Baroto Perryman, who is professionally poised and glamorous, and therefore seemingly trustworthy. He's instructed to drop the kids off at an apartment where there are a dozen other child contestants inside, and to return a few hours later. When he does, the place is dark and abandoned. He's been fooled, and those kids are about to enter hell. Special Agent Ballard, meanwhile, is in the midst of entrapping his umpteenth internet consumer of child porn. Ballard has been on the beat for 12 years, and has captured some 280 pedophiles. But what haunts him isn't just the awfulness of these crimes, the horrific videos he has to watch. It's that he's catching culprits without rescuing the children. He wins the trust of his latest sicko by taking him out of his holding cell and implying that he himself is also a secret pedophile. In this way, Ballard is able to discover a link in the trafficking chain, and he launches an operation to nab the trafficker. When he does, at the Mexican border, he saves the young boy from that opening scene. But what about the boy's sister? She's still trapped in the nightmare, and this eats away at Ballard. It becomes his mission, his obsession. He must save her. Ballard and his wife, Catherine, Mira Sorvino, have 6 kids. Rocio, in the film's Christian view, becomes an extension of their family. All children are God's children and are therefore all of our children. Or something. But this is faith-based piety laid over a situation that didn't need it. Ballard has made a decision to go after the traffickers themselves, a nearly impossible task that's not backed by the Homeland Security apparatus. His boss gives him 1 week and 10 grand. But as he travels down to Colombia, the film comes alive as an undercover thriller. It helps that Ballard's central contact is Vampiro, an American who used to launder drug money for the cartels, and is played by the great actor Bill Camp as a skeevy expatriate who's like a character you can imagine Hemingway coming up with if he'd lived into the 1970s. Vampiro, after spending time in prison, has been atoning for his life of sin, but he's still steeped in it. Camp makes him an ebullient sleaze, who's still connected to the worst people you can imagine. Ballard starts to work with him, and they come up with the idea of launching a fake members-only club for wealthy pedophiles as a way of entrapping the local traffickers, who include Caviezel, a former beauty queen. For a while, the movie becomes the grungiest Miami Vice episode you ever saw. But Ballard must ultimately travel downriver, a la Apocalypse Now, into the jungles of the Nariño province, a rebel stronghold where the chief rebel, named Scorpio, has made Rocio his slave. Ballard and Vampiro are posing as UN doctors. That's how they gain entree to the rebel camp, which is also a cocaine factory farm. The director, Alejandro Monteverde, stages this sequence without hyping the danger. It's not a glorified Rambo movie or a Netflix thriller pretending to be serious. When the deliverance we've been seeking arrives, it feels earned. In a conventional pulp way, we've glimpsed the heart of darkness. We've seen something about our world that makes the desire to take action seem more than an action movie gesture. The incredible true story of a former government agent turned vigilante who embarks on a dangerous mission to rescue hundreds of children from sex traffickers. In Sound of Freedom, a project that star Jim Caviezel is openly deeply passionate about, director Alejandro Monteverde, co-writing alongside Barr, acknowledges early on a gut-wrenching fact that while many pedophiles are caught and incarcerated, the trafficked children often remain missing. Caught off guard into admitting this, Department of Homeland Security agent Tim Ballard, Jim Caviezel, understandably finds himself frustrated, convinced that more can be done. As such, he decides to go undercover around a newly detained perpetrator, expressing fake sexual lust for children, earning trust, and luring him into a long con to rescue kids. He is successful and eager to set up similar, much larger operations, although he receives pushback as it's not in the budget with no guarantee of results. However, the heart of the film naturally comes from the victims. A harrowing opening sequence also shows the slimy deception that goes into kidnapping these victims, with the opening credits opting for something equally sinister as children are captured in broad daylight, with a woman posing as an entertainment agent, Jessica Borodo Perryman, in Honduras, telling a father that his young son Miguel, Lucas Avila, and daughter Rocio, Cristal Aparicio, have what it takes to achieve success, presenting herself with enough credibility for the father to fall for the trap. When the father, who comes back later that night after auditions to pick up his children, finds the room empty, it is a legitimately devastating moment filled with immense sadness. While no one wants the narrative to fall into straight-up exploitation, much of Sound of Freedom is understandably centered on Tim Ballard's determination to make a lofty difference and improve the world. intimidating pedophiles with a tough guy persona, which is obviously not a bad thing, but is often awkwardly delivered and doesn't always fit the film's dramatic tone. There's nothing wrong with the choice, but the execution, which sees him less as a character and more as an unflawed symbol for good. As a result, some of the dialogue is wonky in its intended inspiration. Practically every other character in the film feels more real, most notably an American expat named Vampiro, the always reliable Bill Camp, who recounts a horrifying story of not realizing that a sex worker he once picked up for fun was not 25 but actually 14, thus mentally scarring him and driving him to the brink of suicide. Now he, too, has a chance to do some good. There are also the usual cliched family flashbacks to provide a more personal look at Tim's life, and that this mission is important as a father of young children. However, the flashbacks are so short and meaningless, amateurishly edited into the larger story, that one can't help but feel they are an unnecessary waste of time, especially for a film that is already 2+ hours where some trimming could clearly be done. Thankfully, once Tim Ballard quits his job and starts assembling rogue missions to rescue his children, Sound of Freedom comes alive with a series of elaborate stings escalating in danger. The goal is to rescue Miguel, and then use his horrific knowledge to locate his slightly older sister. Naturally, this brings the characters close to some absolutely despicable human beings, but rightfully done so with restraint to become a generic action rescue flick. The situations might become grander and more terrifying in scale, but wisely remain grounded in reality. As such, the second hour is much more engaging than the first and feels more focused. There is also a score by Javier Navarrete that, while sometimes feels overwhelming and forced, builds its way to a powerful climactic repeal utilizing subtitles of all things. All of this is important for sure, though, and I'm sincerely happy the filmmakers and Jim Caviezel are getting something they are so passionate about into the world, but the execution here is weak. Sound of Freedom loudly bangs the drum for its important message, worshipping its protagonist without any thoughtful characterization, doing little of note beyond moving performances from Lucas Avila and Cristal Aparicio as traumatized, tightly bonded siblings. One of the most disturbing moments in Sound of Freedom is one of the least graphic. In fact, the scene is so subtle that I can describe its contents in this essay without describing anything explicit. It occurs during the harrowing opening sequence, in which a working father, Jose Zúñiga, in a Honduran town drops off his young daughter Rocio, Cristal Aparicio, and younger son Miguel Lucas Avila at what he believes to be an audition for a talent agency. When the father hopes to attend the audition with his kids, the lady managing the audition, Jessica Baroto, briskly tells him no stage fathers are allowed in and asks him to be back at 7 p.m. sharp. After he leaves, we see the lady direct the excited children in a photo shoot, which starts off as we might presume such an audition would. The camera is our point of view, and some early smiles and pictures to warm up give way to more mannered poses. We notice that the lady undoes a few buttons on the little boy Miguel's shirt. Rocio's long black hair, which had been combed straight with a white headband holding it back, is let out, while lipstick is put on her lips. The lipstick is the strongest signal, yet the sexualization of the children remains implicit. It's not overt, but during the shoot it becomes apparent to the viewer that this is not an ordinary photo shoot. There's something off about the poses, the unbuttoned collars, and the makeup, while still remaining in the realm of a regular photo shoot. In other words, there's nothing explicitly pornographic going on. Is this only creepy because the audience knows what this movie is about and where all this is going? Or are we supposed to be disturbed by the hints of sexualization, like thick makeup on a little girl? And then the horror of this scenario fully dawns on us. We are watching this. The children are being made to pose for us, the movie audience aligned with the camera's point of view. Everyday people, such as those who go to movie theaters, so-called normal people, are enabling this billion-dollar human sex trafficking industry. We are the consumer. This sequence highlights two aspects that make Sound of Freedom better than I expected. In fact, it's one of the best new releases I've seen this year. Both relate to the fact that the film is more sophisticated than most hot takes and takedowns, and even most positive reviews have noted. The first is that the film depicts the demand as well as the supply side of child sex trafficking, making this a multidimensional social drama, in addition to being a taut, gripping procedural thriller. In this manner, the film brings the narrative structures now common to drug thrillers since Traffic 2000 to bear on an increasingly prominent illicit trade, but one that, as far as I can tell, has never received this kind of thriller expose treatment. The second is that Sound of Freedom is surprisingly formally understated and controlled. The movie is all the more powerful and disturbing for its restraint and focus. What those who complain about the muted tone get wrong is that director Alejandro Monteverde and his crew seem to be consciously avoiding making this an exploitation flick. And as far as I'm concerned, that is absolutely the correct approach for telling this sad, dark, sordid tale. One of the final credit titles informs us that the United States is among the largest consumers of child sex. Although the majority of the film takes place in Central and South America, the United States is always the center of gravity in the film, its consumers pulling in the horrid trade. Given how the film spends roughly the first 30 minutes focusing on pedophiles in the U.S., it's not fair to argue that the film depicts child trafficking as only a scourge of the Latin world. Rather, like in the great drug thriller TV series Narcos, 2015 to 2017, it's always clear that the black hole of consumption is the U.S. This is evident early on in Sound of Freedom, after the opening credit sequence, which shows presumably real security camera footage of children being kidnapped around the world. We soon find out that those pictures we watched being taken in the sequence I described above are now the sinister spring catalog of a pedophile, Chris Avedisian, writing to his followers on the dark web. We meet Homeland Security Investigations, HSI Special Agent Tim Ballard, played by Jim Caviezel, in the white van outside the pedophile's house. Ballard and his partner bust the pedophile and discover his archives in a basement full of child dolls, in a scene that evokes the lighting and atmosphere of David Fincher's Seven, 1995. The suburban house with a creepy basement also conjures the American Gothic of The Silence of the Lambs, 1991. It turns out the pedophile is something of a theorist, having written books arguing for the natural pervasiveness of his fantasies and desires. After a conversation with his partner about how few kids they ever rescue, Tim decides to string the pedophile along in order to catch another man going across the southern border into the U.S. with a boy, Miguel. A quiet conversation between Tim and the rescued Miguel over a burger and fries is the pivotal transformation scene for Tim when he realizes that he needs to focus on rescuing the children. It's also one of the most powerful scenes in the movie. The little boy, who has gone through unspeakable things, simply asks Tim if he will rescue his sister Rocio, and then gives him his St. Timothy medallion. The understated performance from Lucas Avila makes the moment believable, yet wrenching. After talking to his boss, Tim gets a few weeks and a few $1,000s to go down to Latin America to look for the girl. But when his time and money runs out, he chooses to leave Homeland Security and pursue his mission independently. Tim eventually joins up with one of the film's unforeseen pleasures, Vampiro, played by Bill Camp, who is a former cartel guy who reformed after years in prison and now pays to free child sex slaves. Camp brings gusto to his performance, which plays well against Caviezel's Tim, who is monomaniacally focused and determined. As Tim states to his boss at one point, if he doesn't succeed in this case, he won't be able to repair himself. Caviezel brings a suppressed yet furious energy to the role, suggesting a man on the edge of losing his sanity. Caviezel channels his previous work in The Passion of the Christ, 2004, and Paul, Apostle of Christ, 2018, making Tim a man of sorrows who can also mask himself as an American dude bro during undercover sting operations. Caviezel and Camp work well together, along with Eduardo Verastegui's Paul, a billionaire who helps Tim out with his sting because he likes to play cop, and Jorge Javier Godino, a Colombian police officer who is always pushing up against the limits that his profession imposes on what he can do to stop traffickers. The four actors generate a strong team dynamic while never being so jokey that we forget the seriousness of their mission. Mira Sorvino shows up in a few conventional scenes as Tim's wife, encouraging him to fulfill his mission. The best performances are by the girl, Cristal Paricio, and the boy, Lucas Avila, as they are able to convey deep sorrow alongside the normal mannerisms and expressions of children. They never seem precocious or performative. The screenplay, written by Barr and the director, Alejandro Monteverde, focuses on how each step leads to the next in Tim's mission to track down the girl. Turning this story about a sprawling global industry into a tale of one man trying to rescue one lost girl makes the story clear. The story also becomes an archetypal quest. The knight must rescue the princess stolen by the monster. Barr and Monteverde managed to distill the complexity of the issues into digestible form for a narrative film. Allusions to other works of film and television help direct the audience's emotions and to build connections to other more familiar areas of crime. The constant atmosphere of dread conjures the great U.S.-Mexico border drama Sicario 2015. The attention to procedural investigations and criminal operations reminded me of Traffic and Narcos. Historical connections are forged with a sea journey of children in shipping containers, recalling the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. The references and allusions to many crime and drug thrillers and historical works situate this hot-button issue within a wider fictional and historical universe. Doing so, it makes what is not an easy subject to talk about, and one many do not even want to acknowledge, into something horrible and sad. But that also fits within our broken world. Although the film is deeply disturbing, we begin to see the series of motivations and consequences related to the issue of human sex trafficking. Tim's eventual journey upriver into the jungles of rebel-occupied Colombia recalls Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, 1899, and its screen adaptation, Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, 1979. And I'm not the only critic to say so. Glenn Kenny notes the allusion to Heart of Darkness and Owen Gleiberman to Apocalypse Now. Kenny, however, thought these river and jungle sequences were improbable and boring, demonstrating the film's overall weak and meandering approach. I would counter that the allusions demonstrate the focus and strength of the film's themes. In both Conrad's novella and Coppola's film, the primeval darkness is not only associated with what is upriver in the jungle, in nature. The darkness is also located in the heart of civilization, whether that is thought of as Europe or the U.S., and it cascades outwards through forms of oppression, colonialism, war, slavery. In Sound of Freedom, the journey to the guerrilla stronghold does not obscure or deflect the earlier social criticism of the demand side of human trafficking. Rather, it links the two. The river of oppression flows both ways, founded on raw power dynamics, yet refined through human social and civilizational structures. In the film, we see that the rebels in the mountains are using slaves not only for sex, but also to work in their cocaine operations. We see women and children crushing the coca leaves with their feet. In the jungle, we see the primeval nature of slavery as in its rawest form, the unbridled exercising of power over other human beings. A man with a machine gun or a spear or a club can make another do what he wants. There is a dark line of humans enslaving humans stretching back to the Romans and the Greeks, and even deeper into the ancient world. Time out of mind. Sound of Freedom is at its most perceptive when it links this brute oppression to the darkness of computer rooms and basements in 21st century North America, where we see the modern form of slavery and its relation to the creation and distribution of images. A haunting scene early on shows Tim having to watch and transcribe scenes of child pornography to acquire the evidence to prosecute the offenders. Monteverde shows the reflections on Caviezel's pupils, as if the images are burning into his eyes. The film, through its narrative of closely connected sequential storytelling, helps us remember that each image of a person online actually points to a reality. When the film's pedophile says he doesn't indulge his fantasies in real life, that may be a lie, but we also see the connection between the indulgence through pornography and actual sexual and violent acts. They are placed on the same shadowy continuum of evil, even if there is a sequence that leads deeper into the darkness. The power of images is not only present in the great early sequence I analyzed at the start of this essay, it's also present near the end of the film, in a scene that makes Sound of Freedom so not the vigilante movie some have denounced it as. When Tim finally locates Rocio in the jungle, he tells the girl to close her eyes so she won't see him fight her captor. She opens her eyes a few times, but she and we, the audience, never do clearly see her monster slain. The scene is shot in such a way that we get no thrill from it. There's nothing visceral or exciting about it. The film is at its most clear-sighted in this choice to forego most of the possible gratuitous revenge that cinema so often delights in. An earlier sting Operation Arrest is the exception that proves the rule. I'm not saying you should not make revenge movies, but in the case of Sound of Freedom, in a movie so concerned with the danger of images, limiting the depiction of revenge restrains the film's form to match its message. Furthermore, the filmmakers do not want us to take too much satisfaction in any justice achieved in the film's story, as they want to catalyze justice in the real world. Sound of Freedom is not for everyone. While we never see the sickest deeds, I know some people whom I don't think could stomach seeing a child put in a situation where we can imagine what will happen next or what has already happened. The film wants to cast light on the darkness many of us thought we could never imagine, and thereby urge political action in the real world. Sound of Freedom denounces, with restraint yet passion, a dark reality that more people should probably muster up the courage to face. I would have liked that message to also include a list of resources that victims can turn to, organizations that people with information can contact, and funds that are set up to help rehabilitate rescued children, because removing them from the hands of their abuser is only part of the work. I think it would also be great if Angel Studios were to put this information on their website as well. Angel Studios is raising gobs of money from donations and ticket sales. You don't beat out Indiana Jones and not rake in vast amounts of profit. I might have missed them. But I don't see any statements from Angel Studios about how this money is being used. It's possible that they just haven't got that far in the process, and I hope that they come up with a plan soon and push that out to social media for people to see where all of this profit is going. And as a final point in Caviezel's closing message, he mentions that this isn't his story or Tim Ballard's story. This is Miguel's and Rosh's story. And I think he is right. Tim Ballard might be the main character, but it's the children's story of abduction, abuse, and rescue, with all of the money being made on this film, an Indiana Jones level of profit. I hope that Angel Studios is sending Miguel and Rosa a good portion of that money, because this movie would not exist if not for their experiences. Other information about this film, Sound of Freedom, is being sold as a conservative thriller. It's based on the true story of Tim Ballard, the former Department of Homeland Security special agent who has devoted himself to fighting child sex trafficking, and who took his crusade private when he founded Operation Underground Railroad. With backing from Glenn Beck, the movie stars Jim Caviezel, who in the 19 years since he played the title role of Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, has been a go-to actor for the kind of faith-based projects the vast majority of Hollywood stars steer clear of. Wearing a trim dark beard and coppery blonde hair, Caviezel plays Ballard as a beatific Joe meets George C. Scott in Hardcore meets an avenging Jesus. The movie has a Christian undercurrent that occasionally becomes an overcurrent, as when Ballard explains why he's fixated on the crime of trafficking, because God's children are not for sale. Sound of Freedom has been heavily marketed on right-wing media, like Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, and one of the grand subtexts of all of this in taking on the issue of the horrific criminals who kidnap and traffic children. The film could be seen as adjacent to the alt-right paranoia that was originally stoked by 4chan and Kanan the Wingnut conspiracy theory about a Washington, D.C. pizza parlor being a front for a pedophile ring extending into the larger conspiracy theory that says that the whole culture of liberalism is a racket to protect and cover up a cabal of pedophiles. All of that, let's be clear, is insane nonsense. Yet let's assume that, like me, you're not a right-wing fundamentalist conspirator, cons iRacy theorist looking for a dark faith-based suspense film to see over the holiday weekend. The movie opens July 4th, even. Then you needn't hold extreme beliefs to experience Sound of Freedom as a compelling movie that shines an authentic light on one of the crucial criminal horrors of our time, one that Hollywood has mostly shied away from. The film was completed in 2018 and then shelved by Disney after it acquired 20th Century Fox, the film's original studio. It was finally bought back and is now being distributed independently. How many movies and TV shows have we all seen about drug trafficking? Too many. Child sex trafficking, by contrast, isn't a subject that lends itself to entertainment. But as Sound of Freedom informs us, it's the fastest growing international criminal network the world has ever seen. A closing title states accurately that there are more people enslaved now by sex trafficking than there were when slavery was legal. And the nightmare lived by captured children is unspeakable, unimaginable, and all too real. Let's be clear, this matters more than the cocaine or opioids industry. One of the purposes of a movie like Sound of Freedom is to sound the alarm in the way that a dramatic feature film can do. And that journalism often can't. It takes us into the forbidden zone. It taps our primal emotion of empathetic terror, yet Sound of Freedom isn't a work of art. Like Lucas Mudd's Lilia Forever, 2002, the one great movie that's been made about sex trafficking. No one saw it, but it's extraordinary. This is a genre thriller. That said, it's an urgent and honest one, and Caviezel gives his most committed performance since The Passion of the Clue. Christ, he seasoned now with the smoldering aura of a more sensitive Clint Eastwood. He knows how to underplay the rage and despair, and how to make the drama of going undercover into something life-size in a sequence that's suck in your breath, devastating. Roberto Jose Zuniga, a single father in Honduras, agrees to let his 11-year-old daughter, Rosio Crystal Aparicio, and her 7-year-old little brother try out for a music competition show that's being overseen by Katie Jelly Jessica Baroto Paman, who is professionally poised and glamorous and therefore seemingly trustworthy. He's instructed to drop the kids off at an apartment where there are a dozen other child contestants inside, and to return a few hours later. When he does, the place is dark and abandoned. He's been fooled, and those kids are about to enter hell. Special Agent Ballard, meanwhile, is in the midst of entrapping his nth internet consumer of child porn. Ballard has been on the beat for 12 years and has captured some 280 pedophiles. But what haunts him isn't just the awfulness of these crimes, the horrific videos he has to watch. It's that he's catching culprits without rescuing the children. He wins the trust of his latest CO by taking him out of his holding cell and implying that he himself is also a secret pedophile in this way. Ballard is able to discover a link in the trafficking chain, and he launches an operation to nab the trafficker. When he does at the Mexican border, he saves the young boy from that opening scene. But what about the boy's sister? She's still trapped in the nightmare, and this eats away at Ballard. It becomes his mission, his obsession. He must save her. Ballard and his wife, Catherine Mira Sorvino, have 6 kids. Rosio, in the film's Christian view, becomes an extension of their family. All children are God's children and are therefore all of our children. But this is faith-based petty, laid over a situation that didn't need it. Ballard has made a decision to go after the traffickers themselves a nearly impossible task that's not backed by the Homeland Security apparatus. His boss gives him 1 week and 10 grand. But as he travels down to Colombia, the film comes alive as an undercover thriller. It helps that Ballard's central contact is Vampiro, an American who used to launder drug money for the cartels and is played by the great actor Bill Camp as a skevy expatriate who's like a character you can imagine Hemingway coming up with if he'd lived into the 1970s. Vampiro, after spending time in prison, has been atoning for his life of sin, but he's still steeped in it. Camp makes him an abandoned sass who's still connected to the worst. People you can imagine. Ballard starts to work with him, and they come up with the idea of launching a fake members-only club for wealthy pedophiles as a way of entrapping the local traffickers, who include Caviezel, a former beauty queen for a while. The movie becomes the grungiest Miami Vice episode you ever saw, but Ballard must ultimately travel downriver a la Apocalypse Now into the jungles of the Narino province, a rebel stronghold where the chief rebel named Scorpio has made Rosio his slave, Ballard. And Vampiro are posing as UND doctors. That's how they gain ENT trade to the rebel camp, which is also a cocaine factory farm. The director Alejandro stages this sequence without hyping the danger. It's not a glorified Rambo movie or a Netflix thriller pretending to be serious. When the deliverance we've been seeking arrives, it feels earned in a conventional pulp way. We've glimpsed the heart of darkness. We've seen something about our world that makes the desire to take action seem more than an action movie gesture. Positive elements. After Tim returns little Miguel to his grateful father, Roberto, the man tearfully speaks of his daughter, Rosio, saying, "Could you sleep at night knowing one of your children's beds is empty?" That encounter and those haunting words pro to be the catalyst that ignites Tim's quest to locate and extract the little girl. Tim goes to extraordinary lengths to save Rosio. The first step of the plan involves impersonating a millionaire and setting up an island as is a sex trafficking destination. That part of the plan nets many traffickers, and the rescue of some 54 children. Rosio isn't among them. The sting operation does, however, yield intel on her whereabouts. She's being held in a mountain camp run by some very, very bad men. Not only is the camp physically remote, but these people are so bad that no one goes there. Not the authorities, not the government, not anyone but Tim. And one of his all-lies in Colombia, a reformed former cartel money man named Vampiro, hatch a long-shot plot. They pretend to be medical, personal, vaccinating people against a cholera outbreak. It involves taking a boat trip deep into the jungle and then pulling off their impersonation of medical professionals. Both risk their lives to find this one little girl. Tim uses his own finances too. When Tim heads to South America, he's initially given $10,000 for the operation from his boss. He burns through that money quickly, then quits his job and uses his own resources to continue financing his dogged pursuit of Rosso. Information during the credits tells us that by the time Tim left Colombia, he and his team had rescued more than 120 children and arrested more than a dozen sex traffickers. Spiritual elements. There's not a ton of overtly spiritual content here, but in one critical and powerful scene, Tim quotes Jesus' warning in Luke 1:72, "Better a millstone be hung around your neck and you be cast into the sea than you should ever hurt one of these little ones." It's clear then that Tim is motivated at a deep level by his faith. Anyone researching Tim Ballard's life will find that he's a Mormon, though the film never references his particular faith. Explicitly, we repeatedly hear the phrase, "God's children are not for sale." While the film itself doesn't connect these dots, it's hard not to think of Tim's fierce, indefatigable pursuit of Rocio as a metaphor for Christ's pursuit of us. Tim goes into one of the darkest places imaginable to emancipate one trapped little girl, just as Jesus went to an even darker place to save each and every one of us sexual content. The film's entire plot obviously revolves around sex trafficking of children During Jail's initial photo shoot with Rosio Miguel and perhaps a dozen other children, Giselle has them pose provocatively and suggestively. The children think that they're just doing photos as part of the talent search, but obviously the photos will be used on trafficker websites. A guy in a chat on the dark web posts pictures of children and says creepily, "Here it is, gentlemen, my spring sampler." Vampiro tells the story of his conversion out of a life of crime. He hired a prostitute only to find out after the fact that she was just 14 and that she was trafficked when she was just 6 years old. His conscience is stricken and he changes his ways when he realizes that he doesn't want to be someone contributing to destroying the lives of children. Jail and other women wear some revealing outfits. We briefly see the outside of what looks like a strip club in Tiana, Tim, and Vampiro. Often meet in clubs with people dancing intimately and sensually in the background. Multiple conversations revolve around sex clubs and sex trafficking hotspots around the world. Violent content. The children abducted by Jail are kept in a steel freight container, think railroad box car, as they are shipped from Honduras to Colombia. They're given water, but it's clear that they're kept in the container screaming and crying for days. Once Rosio is delivered to her captors, she's branded on the back of her neck with a tattoo declaring who owns her. Much like a cattle brand, we see her wincing in pain as the tattoo is applied. The film never actually depicts sexual assaults against children, but one of the movie's most disturbing scenes shows an adult man shutting the curtains of his hotel room with 4-year-old Miguel sitting on the bed. The man has just told the boy that he must do everything the man asks or his sister may be harmed. We later learn that the little boy was held in sexual slavery in Tiana, Mexico for 3 months. Another similar scene in Colombia shows the crim lord called the Scorpion about to crawl into bed with a child. Tim is hiding in the room and jumps the man. A violent scuffle ensues in which Tim ultimately strangles the man to death. Still another heartrending moment involves Tim as part of his job watching videos of children being sexually assaulted. We see tears well up in his eyes as he narrates it for his report. A trafficker wants to have his foul way with a little boy. Tim is chased by men shooting at him and a child he just rescued. Pursuit and gunfire persist when they're on the boat and then in an SUV fleeing the remote mountainous jungle of Colombia stateside. Tim threatens to extradite a perpetrator to Colombia for trial if the man ends up in prison there. Tim warns he'll be castrated and raped every day later. We see a still photo of a pedophile killed in prison in that country, his head lying in a pool of blood. A montage of authentic-looking black and white surveillance videos shows children literally being abducted right off the streets of presumably Central American cities. Crude or profane language we hear. 3 uses of the S word, as well as 3 uses each of A and a whole. There is 1 use each of HDN and DMIT drug and alcohol content multiple. Characters smoke and drink throughout the film. Vampiro in particular is rarely without a cigar. We also hear some verbal references to the drug trade in Colombia. Other negative elements. None other the fact that every aspect of the story here takes place in a seedy underworld that requires Tim and his team to pretend to be just as horrific as the Purs there. Pursuing conclusion, let's be blunt. Sound of Freedom is a brutal film to watch, but it also might be the most important movie you see this year. Sex trafficking, we hear in the film, is the fastest growing international crime network the world has ever seen. You can sell a 5-year-old kid 5 to 10 times a day for 10 years straight, every day, ordinary. People don't want to hear it. It's too ugly for polite conversation. But meanwhile, over 2 million children a year are being sucked into the deepest recesses of hell. Sound of Freedom isn't a movie you watch for entertainment or escape from the summer heat. It's a movie you buy a ticket to because you're willing to enter into the ugliness of this societal scourge. It's a movie you give consent to shock you out of complacency. It's a movie that can't help but light the fuse on the question, what can I do? Most of us won't probably go to the lengths that Tim Ballard did, but a movie like this, as hard as it is to watch, could serve as a searing catalyst to look for ways that you can help combat human trafficking in your city, your state, because, as Ballard says, God's children are not for sale. What you need to know. Sound of Freedom follows the inspiring true story of Tim Ballard, a former government agent who puts his life on the line to rescue hundreds of children from sex trafficking. After an operation that saves a young boy from trafficking, Tim learns the boy's sister has also been sold into the sex trade. At first, he continues to operate under Homeland Security, but when funds run out, he takes matters into his own hands with the help of a small team. Tim launches a investigation to save the boy's sister, save many other children, and bring the perpetrators to justice. Sound of Freedom is gripping and heartbreaking, but giving the movie sheds light on the need for strong people to stand up for God's children around the world who are caught in the vicious, abusive system of sex. Trafficking. Sound of Freedom has a strong Christian moral worldview that promotes sacrifice and the message that God's children are not for sale. Content-dominant worldview and other worldview. Contentment's very strong Christian moral worldview and story about a man who sacrifices his safety and well-being to save hundreds of children. A common thread throughout the movie is that people should live in the power of hope and not fear. The movie promotes the message that God's children are not for sale. There are some other references to obeying God and sacrifice leads to freedom. Foul language, some brief foul language includes one use of ensured violence. The movie addresses the reality of child sex trafficking in a nuanced and creative way that doesn't show outright sexual abuse or rape, but all of those are implied. Plus, in one scene, a doctor confirms that an 8-year-old boy has been sexually abused. A man kills a man who about to rape a young girl, but the man is killed in a subtle and non-graphic way. One scene has gunfire, a man hits a young girl in the face, and some real-life footage plays of children being kidnapped. More detail. Sound of Freedom follows the inspiring true story of a former government agent who puts his life on the line to rescue hundreds of children out of sex trafficking. Sound of Freedom is an incredible, gripping, and heartbreaking but hope-giving movie with a strong Christian moral that sheds light on the need for strong men and women to stand up for God's children around the world who are caught in the vicious, abusive system of human trafficking. While on a shift, Tim busts a pedophile connected to sex trafficking. Tim pretends to befriend the man, but arrests him as soon as it's confirmed. He's bought a child, Tim, and his team arrest another man who's bringing the boy across the border from Mexico into California. Tim talks to the boy and learns that his sister was also sold into sex trafficking. Tim learns that the boy was sexually abused, but is able to reconnect him with his father, spurred on by hope that he can reunite the sister with her brother and father. He goes to South America to run a sting operation with a former cartel member and a local government agent supported by his wife. In the States, Tim soon realizes that the U.S. government can't fund his operation. Fueled by hope, Tim becomes a vigilante and begins to execute a large-scale plan to save the little girl and many other children caught in sex trafficking. The Sound of Freedom is a gripping and heartbreaking but hopeful movie that promotes the need for strong men and women to stand up for God's children around the world who are caught in the vicious, abusive economy of sex trafficking. Jim Caviezel and Bill Camp are great together as Tim Ballard and a former cartel leader who helps him. Mira Sorvino delivers a strong performance as Ballard's wife. Sound of Freedom shines a light on the reality of sex trafficking and the terrible global impact it has on children. Despite its heavy subject matter, The Sound of Freedom offers a voice to the voiceless in this inspiring true story. Tim is motivated by hope and the biblical idea that God's children are not for sale. This becomes the movie's anthem and the message the filmmakers want to convey to audiences. The violence, sex trafficking, and sexual abuse in the movie is primarily implied rather than shown. However, it remains a tough, intense, and honest look into one of the largest industries that plagues today's world. Today's Sound of Freedom has a strong Christian moral worldview that promotes sacrifice to protect children and acknowledges God as Father and Creator. Champions the idea that sex trafficking can be defeated with hope and strength instead of fear. Sound of Freedom is an important movie that aims to help save children and grow awareness about the reality of the global sex trafficking industry. This film, directed by Alejandro Monte, written by Rodar. Alejandro Monte, produced by Eduardo, starring Jim Caviezel, Maesvino, Bill Camp. Cinematography, Gorka Gomez, Andrew, edited by Brian Schofield, music by Javier Navit, production company, Santa Fe Films, distributed by Angel Studios. Release date July 4th, 2023, running time 131 minutes, country. United States languages, English, Spanish. Budget, $14.5 million, box office, $250.66. This is the review of Sound of Freedom movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like.